At first, it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like care, like maturity, like choosing the relationship over your own impulses. You tell yourself you're being patient, understanding, low maintenance. You don't say the thing that rises in your chest. You let it pass. You let a lot of things pass. And slowly, without realizing it, something changes, not dramatically, not all at once. Just enough that one day the connection feels thinner, quieter, harder to reach, and you can't quite explain why attraction doesn't usually die because of conflict. It fades because of silence, because of everything that never became a moment, everything that never became real. In the beginning, there was tension, curiosity, a sense that both of you were slightly off balance, slightly exposed. You noticed how they watched you, how their attention lingered, how small reactions felt charged, and somewhere along the way, you decided to smooth the edges. You stopped saying what felt risky. You learned what kept things calm, what kept them comfortable. You became easier to be with, not fake, just edited. You didn't lie, you just didn't say everything. You noticed when they pulled back a little, and instead of leaning in, you adjusted. You gave space before it was asked for. You softened before there was tension. It felt considerate, emotionally intelligent. But attraction isn't built on comfort alone. It's built on presence. And presence requires friction, difference, the courage to let someone feel you fully, even when it might disrupt the moment. Somewhere early on, you learned that connection was fragile, that closeness could disappear if you were too emotional, too honest at the wrong time. So you adapted. You became observant instead of expressive, self-controlled instead of spontaneous. You learned to read the room better. Then you listened to yourself. And people often praise that. They call it being grounded, being secure, being stable. But inside, something is slowly being trained out of you. The instinct to reach, to reveal, to react in real time. Attraction needs to feel movement. It needs to feel that being close to you changes the air slightly. When everything is managed, nothing is felt deeply. You start to notice it in small ways. They don't look at you the same way. Their curiosity feels muted. Conversations feel smoother, but flatter. There's less anticipation, less spark. And you can't point to a single moment where it broke, because nothing broke, it just stopped growing. The emotional mistake isn't loving too much, it's shrinking too quietly. It's believing that being easy to stay with is the same as being engaging to desire. You don't argue, you don't push, you don't demand, you absorb, you make yourself smaller in invisible ways. And at first, the relationship feels safe. But safety without tension slowly becomes numbness. Attraction needs to feel that the other person has an inner life that isn't fully predictable, that being close to them requires attention. When you preempt every reaction, there's nothing left to discover. You start anticipating instead of responding, managing instead of relating, and the other person doesn't even know why. Something feels off. They just feel less pulled toward you, less activated, less awake, not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped doing something real. There's a moment most people remember, even if they don't consciously mark it. The moment they noticed something they wanted to say and didn't. The moment they felt a boundary form and softened it instead. The moment they felt hurt and told themselves it wasn't worth bringing up. Those moments stack quietly. They don't create explosions, they create erosion, and erosion is harder to notice than damage. You tell yourself you're protecting the relationship, but what you're really protecting is the version of yourself that won't risk rejection. You learned early that love could be withdrawn, that attention wasn't guaranteed, that stability came from being agreeable, not expressive. So when something feels uncertain, your body doesn't move toward honesty. It moves toward control. Control over tone, control over needs, control over emotional visibility. You don't say, "This matters to me." You say, "It's fine," and you mean it, in a way, because you've learned how to survive without being fully met. But attraction doesn't grow toward survival. It grows toward aliveness. The uncomfortable realization usually comes late. It comes when you notice that you're no longer missed the way you once were, that your presence doesn't create the same pull That being apart doesn't seem to register, and you start wondering what changed. You didn't stop caring. You didn't become distant. You became careful, and careful is rarely magnetic. There's a quiet grief in realizing that you taught someone how to treat you by never letting them see where it actually hurt. They didn't cross your boundaries. They never saw them. They didn't lose interest because you were too intense. They lost interest because nothing felt at stake. Attraction needs to feel that something could be lost, not drama, not chaos, but truth. The truth that you have edges, that you react, that you are affected. When you remove that, you remove the sense that being close to you matters. This pattern doesn't show up once, it repeats. Different people, same dynamic. At first, there's interest, then comfort, then a quiet fading. And each time, you tell yourself it just wasn't the right match, but part of you knows. You feel it in how you hold back faster now, how quickly you adapt, how little you expect to be met without explaining yourself perfectly. You've become very good at being acceptable and very disconnected from being felt. The cost isn't just attraction, it's identity. You start forgetting what it feels like to be spontaneous in connection, to let a reaction land without managing it, to say something slightly unpolished and stay present anyway. You become emotionally fluent but relationally distant. People feel safe with you, they trust you, but they don't ache for you, and that realization hurts in a quiet, adult way. Because there's no one to blame, no dramatic ending, just a pattern that slowly starves the part of you that wants to be chosen passionately, not just appreciated. Attraction doesn't need perfection, it needs honesty with friction, the kind that says, "This is me in real time." Not edited, not buffered. When that disappears, connection becomes polite. And polite connection doesn't last. Not because it's bad, but because it doesn't move anyone. You can feel this now, even as you listen, not as a conclusion, not as a lesson, just as a recognition of how often you learned to stay quiet, to stay close, and how closeness, without expression, slowly becomes distance. Nothing needs to be fixed in this moment. Nothing needs to be decided, just noticed, because attraction doesn't die suddenly. It fades when the relationship stops being a place where your inner world is allowed to exist out loud, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. The silence feels different after that, heavier, more intentional, and somehow clearer.